Hi, this is Aaron and Linda with Traveling Flamingo, and today we've got some really great Halloween news for you. It's a great little treat. Cruising is going to be resuming, at least. The no sail order will not be renewed. That's the no sail order that's been preventing cruises from going. That is being replaced, however, with a conditional no sail order. We'll get into all of those details. There's some new recommendations. There's a bunch of new information. We're going to give all of that to you coming right up.
So the CDC has brought out a bunch of the requirements. It's a huge 40-page document we went through for you guys. The first half of our video today is going to be reviewing those requirements from the CDC for the cruise lines on what they need to do to have a safe return to cruising. A lot of these things we didn't see in Europe, so they do have different expectations for returning to cruising in the US. And then the second half of our video today, we are going to be specifically looking at those requirements, which are going to affect you as a passenger and your cruise on your experience. So what do we need to know about that for our cruising?
So what does this mean? So the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had placed a ban on all cruises after March 14th, 2020. That's when COVID really started ramping up and they canceled all the cruising. The CDC is no longer going to impose this ban for cruise ships that are entering US waters or cruise ships in the US. They are replacing it with a conditional sail certificate that operators are going to be required to get. So the conditional requirements will remain in effect for 1 year until November 1st, 2021, at least for now. And this does not mean that cruise ships will start tomorrow. This does mean, though, that they can start petitioning for these certificates. And you can already see that cruise lines are starting to hire people. They're starting to try to get people back on the cruise ships as workers. The CDC is still recommending not to cruise because of the risk of COVID-19, and we are in a pandemic. Basically, the cruise operators will need to apply for the certificate by proving their processes and procedures, and that will be reviewed by the CDC. This will be a three-phased approach. Phase 1 is establishing the laboratory testing on board and pre- and post-embarkation. Phase 2 will be conducting simulated voyages to test the cruise operator's ability to mitigate COVID-19. And Phase 3 is this new certification process. So, if you do not have this certificate, the cruise operator cannot sail and it can be revoked. So there are also requirements, very much like the EU Healthy Gateway, for having a plan in place and an agreement with local healthcare authorities and local state authorities to deal with the evacuation of passengers to hospitals after quarantining. So if you remember this from the EU Healthy Gateway recommendation, you have to kind of have a plan that if you've got COVID, there's hospitals that can take them, there's hotels that can host people as needed. So those are core components of this framework.
So let's talk a little bit more about what these simulated voyages are going to look like. So one of the conditions is that they'll have to do these, and there'll be a variety of COVID-related situations that they need to practice. The public will need to be aware that these are simulated cruises, so you can go on one of these cruises, but you need to know that you are participating in a simulation, that you will be participating in unproven and untested health and safety protocols for the purpose of simulating a cruise ship voyage, and that sailing during a pandemic is an inherently risky activity. So you do have to be 18 or older, and you do also need written certification from a healthcare provider that you volunteer as a passenger and you have no pre-existing conditions that make you at high risk for COVID. Crew members must also volunteer to participate, and it can't be a condition of their employment. So it can't say that you have to participate in a simulation to be employed. And some of the things that they're going to be practicing are the embarkation, disembarkation, onboard activities, private island, shore excursions, the evacuation procedures, transfer of symptomatic passengers or crew from their cabins to the isolation room, quarantining all of the remaining passengers, and anything else that the CDC will want tested.
So ships will need to meet the existing CDC hygiene rules. So this basically means you need to do social distancing and wear a mask, et cetera, et cetera. Modified meal services and entertainment venues to ensure social distancing. So that's going to be an important one. All passengers and crew members have to be lab tested on the day of embarkation and disembarkation, and those tests must be available prior to getting on or off of the ship. So that'll be another interesting one. Various other rules, like ending the simulation if someone does come down with COVID-19, is stated as well. And cruise operators will document any deficiencies in what they're calling an after-action report that the CDC will then review. One thing that they really don't specify too much in here is like exact KPIs or what good looks like in terms of some of the times that need to be applied to this. So for instance, if you're on a cruise ship and it's a 7-day voyage, day 2 of this, somebody comes down with it, you need to return immediately. Does immediately mean as fast as the ship can go? Or does that mean, hey, let's just cruise at 5 knots and get there at the end of the 7-day? They don't really say. I think it's kind of obvious, but it does leave some leeway there in terms of what specific KPIs and measures they're going to use to apply to make sure you can get the certificate.
So where did the CDC come up with these recommendations and conditions from? Since April 15th, 2020, the CDC has been collecting data on cruises and cruise members aboard these existing ships. And we did talk about that last week. Actually, there are hundreds of cruise ships actually at sea right now with limited crew to keep the ship going. So they have been monitoring those. And as of October 30th, 6,725 PCR COVID tests had been performed with 4% positive rate. And out of that positive rate, 24 hospitalizations were required and 2 instances did need ventilation. And there were 15 evacuations of crew from the ship. And this is from April 15th to October 30th. And the report does go on to acknowledge the good work that the cruise lines are doing and what the CLIA has done and working with the medical team to define these new recommendations.
So the CDC also did have an open comment period for the public, for cruise industry people, for the cruise lines to comment and to sort of poll some of the stuff that they're thinking. There were 13,000 comments that were received. There's some interesting statistics here. So 75% of respondents expressed support for resuming cruising. So only 25% wanted to delay it. 98% of respondents supported denying boarding to passengers with COVID-19 like illnesses or confirmed infections. 65% of those comments supported denying boarding to passengers with known exposure within 14 days before embarkation. And 74% supported testing passengers and crew before embarkation. 90% of respondents supported cruise operators reducing capacity of the ship, which I think makes sense. And 85% supported wearing face masks. And I know there's been a lot of questions, and we've asked it a bunch of times, would you wear face masks on ships? It seems as though 85%, at least of the public comments and private comments from the CDC, were in support of that. So that's pretty interesting. Out of these findings, though, the CDC does state that there is reasonable belief that cruise ships can spread COVID-19, and as such, they have decided to implement this framework to move forward and allow opening cruising in a safe way.
So on to, as a passenger, what are some of the major changes you're going to feel or experience as somebody who would maybe look to be cruising in the next year? The first thing is that prior to accepting your reservation, there needs to be marketing material that talks about the CDC's travel advisories or warning or any recommendations. You also need to be notified that if the threshold for COVID is detected, that the cruise will immediately end and return to the U.S. port of embarkation, and that your return to home may be restricted or delayed. So just making sure that before you hit confirm that you've got that information provided to you.
That's a pretty big one. If you find someone on board, they're potentially just going to cancel the whole cruise and go home. So 2, the itineraries cannot be longer than 7 days. So there will be no, longer world cruises, at least going through and around the U.S. ports.
The third point is that prior to embarkation, passengers and crew will be screened for signs and symptoms or known exposure of COVID-19. If a passenger is suspected to have or been in contact with a confirmed case of COVID-19, then they will be denied boarding, and this is similar to what we saw in Europe.
For very much like the simulations, on the day of embarkation and disembarkation, cruise operators must conduct laboratory testing of all passengers and crew, and likewise, results must be available prior to getting on or off of the ship. So I'm sure that'll be a bit of a logistical nightmare. I think some may formally call that a shit show that I'm sure is going to happen when you're trying to get on and off of those cruise ships.
There can be enough stress. Like, I know if not for everybody, it is a relaxing experience, your embarkation and disembarkation process to begin with. There have been some where we've had hours and hours of wait and it seems to be disorganized. That is going to need to be tightened up a lot. And maybe with a reduction of passengers, it will be easier to sort of organize. But if you have to have these people before they get on the ship have their test taken and you've got thousands of people, where do they all wait and physically do?
Yeah.
I'm interested to see.
I'm looking forward to the $200 premium you're going to pay for the expedited onboarding experience that includes, private PCR testing that's faster. I'm sure that's going to be the next thing the cruise lines will be putting out there.
Very true. Number 5, if any passengers or crew do develop symptoms, the cruise operator must immediately conduct a laboratory test as well as test close contacts.
Number 6, the cruise operators will report all surveillance and laboratory tests to the CDC. So, if anybody's worried about sort of medical information being tracked, the CDC will have those results from all of this.
Mm-hmm. Number 7, they do need to meet standards for hand hygiene, face coverings, ship sanitation, and social distancing of passenger and crew. So this will mean face coverings being required. And, as Aaron mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of discussion about that and some very interesting opinions about that. And I know there are some states that don't have that law even in effect. So is this something you're going to want to have on your cruise ship or not? Making sure you got a face mask with you all the time, but being aware that will be an expectation.
And number 8, and maybe most importantly, meal services and entertainment venues modified for physical distancing. So there will be differences there. We could see more dining times. Unfortunately, there are no buffets. There will be more in-room dining options just to keep you in your rooms. And there may be more shows and show times and so forth. And they'll prove this out during those simulations when they're trying to figure out how show times and stuff will work.
Yeah, I'm definitely that person who would, at the end of the night, sometimes just pop through the buffet to grab a treat to take back to the room. So I don't know, it will be a different experience. I'm not saying it will be a bad experience or a great experience, maybe knowing this stuff ahead of time, but it's just going to be a different experience, I think.
Yeah.
So again, for passengers, onto an experience that could affect you. So if a passenger or crew does come down and is affected by COVID-19, what can you expect? So it will be an immediate end of the voyage. The cruise is done, as well as canceling any future cruises on that ship until the CDC has directed that they can return, and that cruise ship needs to return to the port of embarkation. So that's sort of interesting. I don't remember that in Europe either, that if a cruise ship returned, the rest of the cruises are canceled. So, you can have weeks of people booked up. So I think that's good to keep in mind. Again, nothing in this world right now is a guarantee. I mean, It never is to begin with, but it really isn't right now.
Yeah. Your confirmation is significantly less of a confirmation at this current point in time.
Yes. There's also will be immediate isolation of the person who is sick or infected, as well of the passengers or crew. They will be put in a single occupation room with a private washroom. This is interesting. We did not see in Europe. All remaining passengers and non-essential crew will also be quarantined. So in Europe, we were seeing that they were actually looking for people who'd been in close contact and had defined what that meant. Here, they have said all remaining passengers. So I think that's a big thing to keep in mind. If someone develops symptoms, that everybody's quarantined in their room.
It may be a good idea if you're debating between an interior cabin and a balcony. The odds of you being quarantined have gone up significantly with these rules, so you may want to think about going for that balcony.
Yes, and more in-room dining. You may want to, you're choosing your trips, right? And a lot of people have had stuff canceled or money reimbursed, so do you have money to pay for a little bit nicer of something? Or would you rather save your money and say, this year, I don't want to be a guinea pig. let's let all this get figured out and save up for something a little
Well,
nicer.
hopefully your 25% cruise credit will let you upgrade to the balcony that you got from the last one that was canceled.
Don't get me started. They also have I'll quote here, arrange to disembark and transport passengers and crew using non-commercial transportation or other transportation. So you're not using your standard airlines, you're not using Lyft or cabs or your buses, your regular buses. They're going to need to make sure it's private. And they are arranging it, but they have not specified who's paying for it.
Yeah, so more than likely you'll want to make sure you have your health insurance, that your health insurance does work during COVID, during a pandemic, or you get the cruise ship insurance, which will probably have a bigger premium now, but make sure that that covers that as well.
Mm-hmm. And the final thing is that if your ship has been one that there is a case of COVID, they will be instructing you once you return home to restrict your movements or return to your final destination to restrict your movement and do that 14-day self-isolation to prevent possible spread. So we still in Ontario have that. So if you were to choose to go away, especially to the States, you do need to make sure that you can either work from home for 14 days or you can take an extra 2 weeks off of work because that you're required to be self-isolating. So it's just good to keep that in mind. You might go on a 7-day trip, but if you've got something big that next week or, either a medical thing or a work thing that you have to be at, don't book your trip then because... Yeah, nothing is guaranteed, and really nothing is guaranteed.
And like here in Canada, they'll check up on you when you come back to make sure you are self-isolating. So other areas could be doing that as well. So there you have it. That is overall the new requirements to resume sailing. I think net, this is positive for the cruise industry. You saw it in the cruise share prices. They went up 11%, normalized to about 5%. You see great feedback coming from all the operators, even the public talking about getting this back. Hopefully a lot of these people will get back to their current jobs. They'll be able to...
Well, people really want to get back to work.
Yeah. So hopefully this definitely helps out a lot of the people in the cruise industry and the travel industry in general. We are looking forward to it. We're probably not going to be on one of those simulation cruises. We're here in Canada and our borders are still closed. Would you though? Would you go on one of these simulation cruises? Are you going to go over to Norwegian's or Royal's website right now to see what simulation cruises are going to be in place? If you do, please tell us what that experience was like. All in all, we're really glad cruising's back. We think these are positive measures. It goes a bit beyond the EU healthy gateways in terms of if anyone's sick, they're going to return back to the port. But, it's all in the up and up. We're looking forward to seeing cruising coming back.
Safety and health is number one.
Yeah, absolutely. So give us comments. What do you think of this? If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button. Feel free to subscribe. And that's it. Happy travels.